Hello and welcome to What's Up With That, the series that demystifies all things Chrome. I'm your host, Sharon, and today we're talking about extensions. What is an extension? What is it extending? How do you make one? Answering all those questions and more is today's guest, Devlin. Devlin is the tech lead and manager of the extensions team and has been working on Chromium for about 13 years. Welcome, Devlin.
Thank you.
So as always, we start with, what is an extension?
So an extension is really the way that we allow users to customize and curate their browsing experience. It's the way that they have Chrome and make it their own.
That sounds good. So Chrome already has a bunch of functionality. How do we decide something should be an extension versus something that should be built into the browser versus maybe like a web platform feature?
So extensions are designed to provide either alternatives to the default experience in Chrome or to provide experiences that maybe aren't popular enough to make it into the mainstream browser. So Chrome is mostly worried about satisfying the use cases for 95 or 99% of users, and we do that really, really well. We build a browser that satisfies all of those needs for everyone, but it's not going to satisfy the more niche needs, and that's where extensions can really come into play. And so these can be anything from changing how the browser behaves in different fundamental ways, like a password manager, giving you that alternative experience, to providing new functionality like coupon finders, to providing really just bespoke functionality that might be only wanted by a few users, where I have one that just tells me how many tabs I have open. Doesn't do anything with them, it just makes me feel bad if that number gets too high.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not one of these people who has a ton of tabs open, but other people I know and work with do, and
Teach me your powers.
Will say things like, I spent an hour closing tabs. Like, that shouldn't be an activity you do, right? So these are cool. So these are things like password managers, the coupon finders. So what are the actual capabilities that those are using that the browser doesn't have that is being done through an extension?
So extensions have a set of APIs that are available to them. Mostly extensions are built on top of the web platform. So they're built using all of the same technologies of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, WebAssembly. But they also have another set of APIs that Chrome exposes. And those largely fall into two categories: ways to extend the browser itself, and so that's things like tab manipulation or altering UI of the browser, and then ways to extend websites, so things like injecting JavaScript. And those two pieces, either extending the web or extending the browser itself, are really kind of the bread and butter of extensions. That's what most of them end up using.
Okay. So people here are mostly people who presumably work on browsers. If you're not, thanks for checking it out. But so with both of these two categories, where does this functionality actually get implemented? Is it stuff that happens in Blink or in content or somewhere else, in the Chrome layer, possibly?
All of the above. And so that's one of the fun things about working on extensions from the browser side, is that because extensions have all of this different functionality of injecting in websites or modifying network requests or modifying the UI in the browser or affecting history, we kind of have our fingers into all of these different layers. So there are aspects of extensions that run in the renderer and interface with Blink through the injection of different content scripts into different isolated worlds, but then there's also extensions code in affecting the network layer so that it can intercept those network requests and modify them or block them as needed. And then there's ones that modify the top level Chrome UI, and so obviously that's going to be in the Chrome layer. So we're kind of all over the code base.
Okay. If you're someone who works on one of these parts of the browser, when should you, as a browser engineer, be thinking about how extensions might fit into what you're working on?
Pretty much always. So we like extensions to always be something that people think about as they're developing new features. With a lot of these features, again, Chrome can build out that fundamental experience that's going to satisfy most users. But then there are ways that extensions might be able to bring more power to that, or be able to allow users to experience it in a different way. And so if you're building out this new feature, whether that be on the web platform or in the browser itself, thinking about whether it makes sense to have extensions able to either have information about that feature, so query different state, or even leverage that feature, is definitely something that we want to be part of that design process very early on. So with some of the recent ones like tab groups, there's an extension API in order to be able to not just see whether tabs are in a group, but to be able to do that tab grouping. And tab management extensions are a big category where we see a lot of different people finding different ways of organizing those tabs. But then on the web platform, you have all these different APIs as well, where you have to consider, okay, how does this play into extensions and what are the considerations there as well?
Okay. So it's kind of in the boat of accessibility and security, where the earlier you're thinking about this, the better.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And not every feature has integration with extensions, but it's always something that we want people to think about and make a conscious decision of.
Right. So as features get added and some of them get exposed to extensions, maybe we can talk about how the extension API evolves. So from what I understand, the extension API for all Chromium-based browsers is the same. And if you want to build an extension and you want to publish it on Chrome, what else is there? Opera, Brave, all these other ones, the API is the same, but you have to go through each of their own web store equivalents. Is that the case?
It depends. So the API is usually the same, although different browsers will also have different APIs. Even Chromium-based browsers sometimes have differences in the API surface. And then some browsers have their own store. And so, for instance, Microsoft Edge does have the Edge add-on store. But other browsers really just rely on the Chrome Web Store in order to have those extensions installed. And most Chromium-based browsers will allow installation directly from the Chrome Web Store. And so as a developer, if you upload an extension to the Chrome Web Store, that gets you access to most browsers out there, Chromium-based browsers and potentially even non-Chromium-based browsers, because they can just implement our own API.
Okay. So with the non-Chromium-based browsers, Firefox, Safari, are those APIs dramatically different, or are they largely the same to the Chrome extension API?
So it is a little bit of both. There's definitely differentiation between the browsers in these different states. And sometimes that's because we just have more APIs or different APIs. Sometimes it's because the underlying feature is different. And so because extensions are designed to extend these different browser capabilities, sometimes the browser capability is different between them or doesn't exist on a different browser. And in that case, the API just isn't going to be there. Over the last several years, we've seen a lot of adoption of the extensions platform across these different browsers, where Firefox and Safari have both implemented the majority of our extensions API surface. And as part of that, we've also formed the Web Extensions Community Group in the W3C. And we're looking at finding what is that common core of functionality that is across all browsers that makes sense to align on and potentially even standardize in the future, so that we say this is how this set of extension capabilities works.
Okay. Is a community group the same thing as a working group? So the last couple of videos were web platform based, and we talked about that a bit. So is a community group just the step before it becomes a working group, or?
They serve slightly different purposes. A community group has a lot more, for one thing, involvement with the community, which in the extension space is really, really valuable, because we get a lot of participation from different extension developers out there. And we have a lot of them that come into we have bi-weekly meetings that we get feedback from, or hear about feature requests, or hear about problems in the platform that we might be able to solve. And so a community group has a lot of that input. But a community group doesn't produce standards, whereas a working group, in theory, does. So we are actually looking at, can we form a working group as well? Right now, we're very early in that process because we haven't produced any kind of specifications. We're working through what would that look like, and is this something that we want to bring to the larger W3C organization and say, we think this is valuable for browsers in general, and we want to have this as part of the standard.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I was both a bit surprised and not surprised to learn that extensions aren't standardized necessarily across different browsers, because it feels very web-based, although it's very also like browser UI-based. So with a lot of web things, like so much of it is about having compatibility and interop. But with extensions, I guess, the audience for each is smaller, right? They're already trying to target the 5 to 1 or even smaller percent of users whose use cases aren't covered by the browser. So maybe that's why it's less surprising that there's not already this standardization.
It's partially that, and partially how the platform came to be implemented by all these different browsers. So if we go back in time a little bit, there were multiple different extension platforms. And so going way back, if you wanted to extend your browser, you would do things like install ActiveX or toolbars or things like that. And we all remember those days of having the 6 toolbars in Internet Explorer. I'm glad those days are behind us, but there's lots of different ways that extensions came to be apart from that as well. Firefox has had add-ons for a really long time. And the Firefox add-ons model allowed for a lot of different capabilities, and frankly, it was kind of scary. And when Chrome came along, we built out the extensions platform, which was influenced a lot by the add-ons model and also by a particular add-on called Grease Monkey, which was very influential in some of the ways that extensions inject into websites. But also, with those extensions, we wanted on our platform to have it be very API-based and very permissions-based, to be able to look at an extension and say, this is what it can and cannot do, and to be very, very strict about that type of boundary. So we had higher confidence in the security of those extensions. And so we all had this different implementation of extensions. We didn't have one shared platform. And after a little while, all the browser vendors came to kind of align on the Chrome model of extensions, and that's where we are now, where we have this pseudo-standardized, because everyone implemented it, version of extensions, but it happened very organically, and it wasn't one of those where we set out to build the same thing. We all kind of built something different and then aligned more or less on one solution.
It's like how evolution, everything becomes a crab or
exactly,
something, right?
Yeah.
Can you give a rough timeline of the events you just talked about? So, of course, like toolbars, we all remember that, presumably. When was that to the add-ons and all these other things?
I don't know if I would be able to do it off the top of my head, but toolbars go back 20 years or more,
sure.
And Mozilla add-ons as well around that same time frame, I think, of the maybe 18, 20 years at this point, and then now I'm starting to feel old. And then Chrome extensions were launched in, I want to say, Chrome 5 or Chrome 6.
Oh, so very early on.
Very, very, very early on.
Okay.
Going way back, I think they used to be called gears before they were called extensions.
Okay.
But there's this idea of an extensions platform that allowed this type of injection and modification.
Right.
And so, that would have been now... oh, man.
I mean, at time of recording, we're at
16,
like Chrome 135 or something,
yeah,
right?
Maybe 16, 17 years ago,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then how has usage of extensions changed over the course of them existing? Have there been different uses of how people are using them? Are there, as more capabilities get added, how has that all evolved?
Yeah, so we've definitely added a lot to the API surface to enable extensions to do different things that they weren't able to before, and to be able to customize the browser and that browsing experience in different ways. But along with that, we've also seen a large shift in the user base that extensions have, where I think that when extensions were first being added to Chrome, there was this viewpoint of extensions as a power user feature, where it was going to be something that we had faith was going to be well adopted and see a lot of use, but was maybe kind of not one of the main features of the browser or mainstream in the same way. And that also led to some different design decisions that we made around permissions and capabilities. And over the last 10 to 15 years, we've really seen extensions take off, which is fantastic. And now around half of desktop users have an extension installed on their browser. And so it's one of the most popular features of the browser, which is really, really exciting to see and really awesome to work on and see that growth. But it also means that some of those assumptions that we might have had earlier on around the platform and around those design decisions where we thought this might not be as popular, might be more of a power user feature, now we have to rethink some of those to see how do we make this, or how do we evolve this, now that it's going to be something that really is used by most users.
Right. Yeah, I mean, even in the time I've been around, which is longer than I would have guessed, but maybe not that long relatively, like the use case for Chrome in general has changed so much, right? Now, before it used to just be like on a desktop computer, now it's like random devices too, right? But Chrome is still built as if it was for a desktop, so there's so much other stuff that isn't necessarily useful always, and just how we have to think about the browser is changing a lot, and it's much more of really an operating system.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can you talk us through how you actually build an extension? Like, if I'm just some developer, not affiliated with anything, I want to build a fun extension because I have too many tabs. What's the process for going about that?
So building an extension is actually really easy. That's one of the best things about extensions, is that it's very easy to get off the ground and to get something out there. And unlike building out a website or a web app, you don't need a server-side component at all. Not that there aren't great tools for that on the web now, but with an extension, it's all kind of self-contained, and you can distribute it to users, and everyone can jump in and use it and try it out. The core kind of first part of an extension extension is the manifest file. And so it's a manifest.json file that just describes what the extension does and some of the architectural parts of the extension and the capabilities that it has. So what APIs is going to use, what kind of the backing structure of the extension is, what UI elements does it provide. And from that manifest, Chrome sets those different pieces up, and then you have different files that the manifest specifies as well that then are used in the extension. So for most extensions, they'll have a background context, which in Manifest version 3, and the Manifest version is kind of like our version of the operating system. It's how we make breaking changes along the way and say that this is the version of the platform that you're coding against. In Manifest version 3, that background context is a service worker. And most extensions will have that background service worker running, and that's where a lot of their logic will happen, and it responds to the events of the browser and things like that. But then there's lots of different parts of extensions that you can also have. So you can have scripts that inject in web pages in order to change how web pages look and feel. You can have a button in the toolbar that might open a pop-up or might open a side panel in Chrome. You can have options pages. You can have context menus. There's lots of different parts that your extension might have, and we provide these building blocks so you can build out that experience for your users.
Right. Can you briefly tell us what a service worker is?
Yeah, a service worker is a web concept that was, interestingly enough, inspired by an extension concept called an event page. And the idea with both a service worker and an event page was, here's a thing that runs independently from any particular tab in the browser. And so most of the time when you think about browsers, you have those tabs at the top, and okay, this is the page that you're looking at. And a service worker is something that runs separate from those and responds to events that come in. On the web, a lot of these events have to do with just fetching resources, where something is fetching a resource from a domain, and the service worker might actually be able to handle that request. And that enables things like offline functionality. In extensions, a service worker also responds to different events from the browser. And so we have events for so many different things, but one of the easy ones might be like when the user creates a tab. The extension can be notified of that in order to handle that behavior or change something in its UI or otherwise react. And the nice thing about service workers is that they are kind of created on demand and then torn down when they're not needed. So since they're event-based, if there's nothing that they need to be doing, if there's no events that they're interested in happening, then we tear that down. We allow the user to kind of reclaim those resources, which is important because otherwise if you have too many of these running, then you get into a problem where Chrome is using up too much memory or too much CPU.
Right. So with publishing, so you've written your extension, you've listed what it can do, you have an idea of what the goal is. How do you get it out to people? So we have the Chrome Web Store, and all extensions uploaded that are vetted, I believe,
yes,
by someone.
Yeah, so when you upload an extension to the Chrome Web Store, it goes through a series of both manual and automated review, where we'll analyze it to determine, is this doing something bad? And bad, of course, is hard to define, right? There's different parts of bad. And so one of the things we obviously look for is malware, where, okay, is this doing something that is really terrible for users and maybe it's going to hijack different data or things like that. But we also look for whether it complies with our policies, where we set out a set of policies that we think help protect users, where it's not necessarily strictly malware, but it is something that we want to make sure that users have choice and transparency into, and make sure that extensions are following those best practices.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to get an extension to users through an avenue that's not that? Like, say you just have something you want it to be for you and your friends, can you just send it to a few people in particular, or does it have to always go through this process?
You can distribute it outside of the web store, and the easiest, most common way to do that for something like that of a hobbyist developer is that we have what's called unpacked extensions, and those are essentially developer mode extensions. They're ones that you go into the Chrome extensions page in the browser, and then you click on a button that says load unpacked, and you can navigate to the directory and add that in. That's really designed for development purposes of when you're building out your extension, how do you test it? We would never want you to have to upload an extension to the web store just to see if the 3 lines of JavaScript you added work. And so you could distribute it in that way. We intentionally make that flow a little bit more frictionful, because we don't want that to be a common way that you reach the masses. And so that really is designed for developers, or like you say, maybe you send it out to your 3 friends to try it out. If you're looking for a wider range than that, uploading to the web store is really the main way that you would distribute those extensions. There's also ways that enterprises can distribute off the Chrome Web Store. If you're looking at, hey, I have my own business that I want to have this extension distributed within, but I don't want to go through the Chrome Web Store for that, there's avenues for that involving enterprise policies that you can configure.
So when you're building an extension, is it largely all in JavaScript then?
That's where most of the logic would happen, is JavaScript, or as the web evolves now, WebAssembly might also be a big part of it. But yeah, the vast majority of the logic would happen in JavaScript. Right. Depending on the type of extension, maybe you have more or less UI, and so there might be more or less HTML and CSS, but it's very similar to conceptually building out something like a web app.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's good that people don't have to build Chrome each time they want to build an extension, right?
Oh, thank
goodness.
Because
that would be, they would not be as popular if that were the case. Yeah. So as extensions, you have an extension, it's on the web store, say, and it's out for users. Either maybe you want to change what your extension is doing, or there's a new feature you want to add. How does the update process for extensions work? Is it the same as the browser itself with this whole milestone model, or is it something that happens on a separate cadence? How does that get to users?
Yeah, it happens on a separate cadence because we want to make sure that extensions are always kept up to date, or at least as best we can. And so when you push a new update to the Chrome Web Store, that will in most cases immediately start to be pushed out towards users. And in Chrome, we'll check for extension updates at various points. Sometimes it's just every few hours, sometimes it's at browser startup. We want to make sure that we have fairly routine checks there to pull down the latest version of an extension. So there's always going to be that long tail of users that kind of falls off because they never update their browser or things like that. But for the most part, extensions stay up to date with whatever the latest version that you have published in the web store is. And then we also give developers a couple of different ways that they can trigger an update check if they're like, hey, I know I just published something, so please update all my users now.
Right. What about the deprecation process of that? With web features in particular, right? Once you have something, this is what you're committing for the next 10, 20 years. Deprecating anything is, a minimum 2-year effort, right? Is the same case true for extensions?
It's a little bit easier in extensions, but not dramatically. And so on the website, we do have a couple of different things that we look at in terms of, is this ready to be deprecated? And one of them is around the number of users that are affected. And I think the typical bar there is 0.01% of page loads using a web feature. That's when we say, okay, this might be something that we can deprecate. In extensions, we look at a very similar bar, and that 0.01% is our same bar for, if it's less than that, okay, we can probably remove it. But if it's more than that, you would go through a very similar process as the web of you need to work with developers to migrate off of that. You need to make sure that there is another capability in place, and there is a long migration path for it. Mm-hmm. With extensions, in theory, we can sometimes tweak that a little bit if we absolutely need to, if we find that there is a security vulnerability or issue with an API. But in general, we try to be very, very conservative when it comes to making breaking changes, because we know that this is a platform that a lot of people rely on. We want to make sure that we're bringing everyone along with us as we evolve that platform.
Yeah, something I say all the time is, unbelievable that the web works, and that things work as much as
when
they
you know
do.
how the sausage is made, sometimes it's like, wow, this actually works. Interesting.
What about because Chrome is big, a lot of users, things languish, right? With extensions that just don't get used for a while, do they ever get cleaned up out of the web store or somewhere else, or do they just accumulate?
Every now and then there will be different kind of moments in time that we'll go through and remove some old extensions if they haven't been updated for a very long time. And usually that happens around, I mentioned earlier, the manifest version. So we'll eventually remove old manifest version extensions from the store if they haven't been updated. So if there's one that truly has not been touched in years or updated in years, those might be removed at some point. For the most part, we don't do that too much, and as long as the extension continues to work, we will continue to host it in the store.
Okay.
But we'll also sometimes let users know on the browser side, hey, this extension hasn't been updated in a while, or it's not using the best practices in Chrome. You might consider removing this or finding an alternative.
Right. So we're on the third version of manifests. How often? So but extensions were first launched in Chrome 6, which would have been, my guess is 2009,
mm-hmm.
right? So is it every 5 years there's a new manifest version? prompts a new change? Is it just enough changes in the web platform, enough things that we want to update? When does the next version, what prompts the next version of the manifest to come?
Typically, we do manifest version bumps when we have a larger batch of big breaking changes that we want to make. And that version bump allows us to have distinct versions of the platform so that there's a very clean delineation of when these different things apply, and it allows us to make those breaking changes in as responsible a way as we can. There isn't any kind of defined cadence for it. It's whenever we have that set of features. And so I think Manifest version 2, I want to say, was around 2012. That might be around, right? And we made a bunch of changes there around the content security policy of extensions in different aspects there. And then with Manifest version 3, we changed a few other things, including tightening the content security policy even more and moving more towards an event-based model instead of what we had before, which were persistent background pages that were always running. And then with MV3, we also focused more on different APIs that allow extensions to do a little bit more with having less access to user data, and so improving the security and privacy around extensions.
Okay. Can you briefly tell us what content security policy is?
Yeah, so content security policy on the web is kind of a way that developers opt into a more restrictive environment. It's an anti-foot gun. And so it's saying, I only ever want to have these types of capabilities. I only want to talk to these sources. I only want to inject scripts from these places. And if anything else happens, browser, Chrome, please don't let it. And in that way, it's a protection against things like cross-site scripting attacks, where maybe if you have a bug in your web page, somebody else could try to inject a malicious script. That wouldn't happen with a content security policy. In extensions, we use this as a set of guardrails where we can have guarantees on the platform, or at least some level of guarantee on the platform, that scripts from other sources won't inject in the extension, because the idea with extensions is that the logic should be contained within that extension package. That's important because of our review process in the store. If extensions are pulling down a lot of remote code from different servers, we can't review that code. So we can't make a judgment decision of whether or not those extensions are safe.
So previously in another episode we talked about site isolation, and extensions operate across all sites, but can they access each other? How does isolation and you need a process to run things in. The idea of site isolation is each site gets its own process. How does extensions manage this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different parts to that. One is that since extensions are built on the web model, we actually do have an extension origin, and so there is an extension process. And extensions all run in their own processes, and actually during the very early days of site isolation, the first thing that we isolated was extensions. It was viewed as, this is the perfect candidate because it's less used than the web, so it's like a nice small pocket, and also it's the scariest thing we have. So it's both the most impactful and a good subset to try it out on, and so site isolation launched for extensions first.
Oh, cool, I didn't know that.
And so we do have that level of site isolation of the extensions all run in their own process. But like you say, they also do kind of run in the context of pages. The way that happens is through defined APIs. So content scripts are one of the main ones, where extensions can say, I want to inject this script into this page. And in that case, that script will run in the process of the web page. Fundamentally, it has to, because it's accessing the DOM and changing different variables there. And so those will all run in that web page process, but we'll lock down the capabilities that content script has. It won't have the whole suite of extension APIs available to it, because that web page is a less trusted process. You also mentioned extensions kind of talking to each other. They have to do that through a defined channel. So there is a messaging channel that they can use if they want to communicate with either web pages or with other extensions, but they don't directly share any process or memory space.
Okay. Is that module-based, or is that something else?
From the extension developer's point of view, no, because these are all JavaScript APIs.
Right.
And so these are exposed, almost all extension APIs are exposed on a global Chrome or browser object in JavaScript. And so the way that you send messages is with chrome.runtime.sendMessage or chrome.runtime.connect.
Okay.
And that opens up a message port that you can pass messages back and forth with other extensions. On the implementation side, a lot of these do end up going through Mojo at different layers, but that's something that luckily no extension developer or no user should ever know what is Mojo. Like that's not something that we ever expect them to understand.
Yeah, the difference between browser engineer and web developer is surprisingly big, right?
Mm-hmm,
There's people who build stuff in browsers. Like, I've never really like made an extension, right? Like, so okay, good to know. You mentioned earlier that extensions are scary, and that's kind of one of the things that's just hard about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're doing all this stuff, password managers, so it knows all your passwords. That's scary. Accessibility, that is, the purpose of it is not scary, but it needs to do a lot, right? It has to see everything going on in your page. So is there how do we manage this trade-off? Because it's such a hard balance to strike, right? Users see a thing pops up and it says, you're granting this extension all these things. And if you don't know what that means, it's like, oh my God, what am I doing here, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we've had in the extensions platform is how do we both balance security and privacy along with capabilities, and how do we make sure that users are aware of what's going on? And I mentioned before some of these design decisions that we had earlier on that maybe apply better to power users that aren't as applicable when we have extensions for the masses. And that's one of them, is this idea of we have an install dialog that very clearly lays out, here are the capabilities the extension has. But some of those capabilities are really scary, like it can read and change all your data on all websites. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And even though we use what we think is fairly clear language, like read and change all your data, we get a lot of users who say, but not really all my data, right? Like you wouldn't let it read my emails or like know my password. And you already touched on it. Actually, sometimes the point is to know your password. A password manager needs to. So we do allow extensions to have that. And things like Grammarly, where it's modifying the content as you write it, needs to know what's in your email, what's in your Google Docs. So these do fundamentally have access to a lot of this data, and it is really, really scary. There's a couple of different ways that we try to protect users and make sure that extension developers have the right tools available for them and that users have the right set of options in order to configure their extensions. The first thing that we do is we have the web store with that review process. And that's not always perfect, but it's pretty good. We generally catch a lot of the bad extensions that come in, and we make sure that the extensions that are getting out to users are safe. But along with that, on the user side, we want to make sure that users can say, this is when and where I want these extensions to run. So a lot of extensions might have the option of running everywhere, but the user might not necessarily need them to run everywhere. If you think of something like a coupon extension, maybe you only shop on 5 sites. So even though that extension can run anywhere on the web, maybe you only care about it on these 5 sites. Or Grammarly, maybe you only type things that you care about really good grammar on a few sites. And so users can then say, even though this extension could run everywhere, I only want it to run here, here, and here. Or I don't want this extension to run here. I never want any extension to run on my banking site.
Right.
And so you can have that list of sites that you don't let extensions run on.
Oh, okay, cool.
So that's the user side.
Right.
The other side is on the developer side, making sure developers have the right tools to be able to accomplish a lot of what they need, maybe without some of that scary content. And a good example of that is one of the changes that we made in Manifest version 3 was moving from how different content blockers worked. Previously, how content blockers worked was that every time a network request was made, Chrome would send the details of that network request to listening extensions, and the extensions would look at that network request and then tell Chrome, okay, do I want you to block this or is this okay? And that meant that those extensions had access to all of that data, everything that you're sending across the network, which is really terrifying. And what we did in Manifest version 3 was move that to a more declarative model, where extensions can tell Chrome in advance, if you see a request that looks like this, please block it. And that way, when those requests happen, we make that decision synchronously in the browser, which is a good performance gain, but it also is a good privacy and security gain because we don't actually have to give that information to the extensions of, this is the data of the request. We just block it on its behalf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also, with a lot of the browser stuff, right, there's also like the trade-off of like wanting to give users options, but also if there's too many options, there's no options.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And, we see this all the time where it's good, but then most users don't know enough to make a meaningful decision. So, when you give it to them, and this seems like there's similar issues, but the idea of having places where you explicitly allow or disallow things seems like a obviously, of course, it's a good idea. It's a great idea, right? You just have an allow and a block list, and you put in,
I wish it were as simple as you just have. Nothing is ever easy in extensions.
Well, nothing is ever easy in Chrome. Okay, cool. So a lot of these have been desktop browsers, right? That's where most people are using them. Can you run us through where, of the places that Chrome runs, where you can and can't use extensions?
So extensions right now only exist in desktop Chrome. So you can use them on Windows, Mac, Linux, Chrome OS, but they don't exist on any other, for the most part, in any other place that Chrome runs. So you don't get extensions on mobile devices like Android or iOS or on tablets, and certainly not in other areas that Chrome might run, like Chrome for Android Auto. Extensions aren't running in that area. So it's just on desktop browsers right now.
And that mobile also includes things like Android Web View, Chrome Custom Tabs, all of that.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. When in your interactions with various browser engineers, when say they make a change and it involves an extension somehow, or they want to add something to the extension API, for the average browser engineer that you encounter, what are things that you, as the extension side team person, wish that they knew more of or had more context on?
Yeah, so one of the main things is what we were talking about before, just considering extensions early on in those changes. When you're adding a new feature to Chrome as a browser, a new web platform feature, thinking about how does this affect extensions? How should extensions be able to interact with this? Does it just work out of the box? Should we make different capabilities? Should extensions be able to leverage it? That's something that I wish everyone thought of more earlier on. And I work on extensions, so I see extensions everywhere, and I'm like, yeah, these are always the most important thing. So I would love it if they got into the Chrome design doc of where we have speed and security. How does this work with extensions? What is the consideration there? But beyond that, I think there's a couple of other things that, especially if those browser engineers are thinking about creating a new API, that are valuable to think of. One is just experience with extensions in some ways. I think that extensions are cool and fun and a great tool, and everyone should build one that they just, just do it as a toy, so that you get that experience of, oh, look, this was easier. I might be able to use these for these things. And a lot of people have built out those custom extensions that just help with their daily workflows, because again, it's really, really easy to do it, and they're a really powerful tool. But with that as well, you get familiarity with the different structures and with some of the APIs and things like that. If you're at the point of designing an API, there's a few different parts that I think are really, really valuable. One is approaching it from a viewpoint of what are we trying to solve, rather than here is the solution. So coming up with the use case and how is this going to play into everything, and figuring out, okay, this is the piece that we want to solve, because maybe the solution there isn't necessarily what was the first one to come to mind. Maybe there's an alternative. Another is thinking very much about long-term maintainability and expansion of those APIs. So we were talking about before deprecation of different pieces. We try to very rarely deprecate any functionality. And so when you build a new API, assume it's going to be there for the next 10 or 20 years. It might outlast us. So having that in as part of it, of knowing that, okay, we should take the time to make this a well-formed, well-thought-out API. This shouldn't be something where, if I'm adding a new Mojo interface, I'll make sure that it looks reasonable. Like, I'm not going to just throw in some code and not care about it, or use the first name that comes to mind. I'll try to make it high quality, but with something like an extension API, it is more stable, and you do need to maintain it long term and think about that. And so taking the extra time to have that design process. Thinking about, okay, if we were to add new capabilities to this in the future, how do we expand it out in a backwards compatible way? So how do we ensure that there's ways that this can evolve along with the platform? Those are a couple of the pieces that I think are really valuable to think about in that API design.
Do we have full backwards compatibility with extensions? Like, all of the previous manifests are all supported?
We don't support manifest version 1 anymore, and we're removing support from manifest version 2.
Okay.
But the manifest versions aren't the only time that we add new capabilities or make changes. We're adding new APIs all the time. Not all the time, but very, very frequently, like many times throughout the year. And we tweak how different APIs might work as well. And so we might provide a new property or argument to a function. And those we want to make sure are backwards compatible. So we try to not have any breaking changes for those as we provide new experiences for extension developers and new tools for them to use.
If you want to learn more about extensions, so separately as someone who is working on the browser and wants to have a better idea of what to consider on the extensions front, where should they look? And then similarly, if you want to go and build an extension, where do you look to find more information on both of these things?
So on the browser side for how extensions work in Chrome, there's a couple of different small videos out there that we've done, or slide decks that you can kind of stumble across, but there isn't a great single source of truth, and I think that's largely true for most teams in Chrome. I don't know of many that have, this is where you learn all about how the code works. For better or worse, a lot of the times the code is the documentation. In terms of building out an extension, it is a public platform. There are pretty good docs out there. And the main docs for Chrome extensions are at developer.chrome.com/extensions. And that will have all our different APIs and a bunch of different tutorials for walking you through how to build different things. There's a bunch of samples there. We also have a really awesome Chrome extensions Devlin team, and they also post videos on YouTube and do deep dives into different concepts. So there's a lot of tools out there for that and resources out there for that. But also, since extensions are a public platform that's seen a lot of love over the years from users and developers, there's great third-party resources. Stack Overflow is an excellent source for a lot of answers, just like it is on the web. And also there's a lot of documentation on MDN for extension capabilities that calls out, here's what's available in Chrome or Firefox or different platforms.
Okay. As the extensions team, what are you primarily working on? So there's adding new features, but a lot of these, is it just exposing browser features already being built as extension APIs? Is it shaping the direction of APIs? Is it deprecating things, moving things forward? Like, what's the breakdown of what the team is trying to do?
All of the above. So one of the areas that we are working on is the Manifest version 2 deprecation. So we moved to Manifest version 3 a few years back, and we've been in the process of removing support for MV2 extensions because MV3 provides better security and privacy and performance guarantees. And so that's one of the areas that we're working on, is making sure that as we remove that support, users have a path forward for any MV2 extensions they still have. They can find alternatives in the web store, that we're giving users a kind of migration path, and that we're helping developers as well if there's any lagging developers that haven't migrated yet. The vast majority of extensions have, where I think that we're above 90% of extension installations are MV3. So that's one of the areas that we're working on. We also are always looking at new APIs and new capabilities that we can add, and whether that's integrating with new parts of Chrome or solving different existing problems in different ways. So I mentioned before how we kind of pivoted to a more declarative version for solving network request blocking. But there's other capabilities or aspects as well where you might be able to say this is a tool or utility that would make developers' lives better. And so we're working on bringing those different pieces. It's 2025, so we have to say AI somewhere. And we are always looking at how extensions can leverage AI. One of the main areas for this isn't so much how do we bring AI APIs directly to extensions. We're also looking at that. But one of the big focuses is that AI has exploded over the last couple of years, and there's so many different libraries and toolkits and frameworks and services that you can use. How do we make sure that those work in your extension? And extensions are a really, really natural place to build out some of these AI-powered experiences, because a lot of what you want to do is bring AI to a web page. And extensions have that capability, and so making sure that those different types of tools work in extensions is one of the other focuses that we're working on there. And then finally, just maintaining the platform and ensuring that it works well on all the different supported areas, and making sure that we keep the lights on and continue having an excellent product that developers can use and users can enjoy.
All right, cool. Any fun stories or any other thoughts you want to share?
Oh, that's far too open. I'm not sure if I have any ready-made ones. No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. This was very interesting. Hopefully we all learned something. I sure did.
Yeah,
so
thank you for having me.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Hello and welcome to What's Up With That. Oh, hold on. I haven't done this in a while. Let's see. See, it's okay to make